Houston's Garage. In this video, I'll be working on the XRAY XB2C 22 edition. I'll be assembling bag 2 for the rear transmission. Let's get started. And put all the parts in my plate so nothing rolls off the table. You got your transmission case halves, nice aluminum motor plate. You got spur gear, idler gear, slipper clutch stuff, and it's kind of nice that they put all the screws in one bag. So let's go ahead and open that up as well. All right, so we're going to start with putting in the top shaft and idler gear, and we're going to be using this piece here. I feel like the quality of these parts are a little off. I'm just kind of holding it together, but you can see that there's quite a big gap in between. Maybe it's supposed to be designed that way, but it just doesn't look good initially speaking. So in the manual, always check next to the instructions, and you can identify the bearings, pins, screws, O-rings by matching it up with the image provided, because they are the exact size that you need. All right, so what we're gonna do is use this piece where it has a hole for the top shaft. Grab the top shaft and the 6x12x4 bearing, and we can install that like so. Next, we need to put together the idler gear, which is this piece here, with two 3x8x4 bearings. They're metal shielded, and they just pop into place. And lastly, we're going to need the pin, which is 3x20mm. So we can go ahead and install that, just like so. And everything moves nice and smooth. Make sure you push in the top shaft all the way. Next, what we can do is take the graphite grease that is included, and we can put a little bit of this grease onto the idler gear. So I'm just going to put a line across a few different spots. You don't need a lot. And it'll eventually cover all the teeth in the gear. So I just put 3 lines across, a nice thin line, and I'm just spinning it now, just so that way all the gears, all the teeth get covered. And I can see from my view, it's gonna be hard to see on camera, but basically every tooth is covered, and there's enough grease on both the top shaft and idler gear. Now we need the second half of the transmission case, and we're going to install the 5x10x4 bearing, which has a blue rubber seal, and we're going to install it where the top shaft is going to go, right here. Just push it in, just like so. And now what we can do is put the two transmission halves together, like so. And then on this side, we have to install 3 screws, these 3 holes. And those screws are going to be M3 by 12 millimeter. And before I do that, there's some nubs, there's some flashing from the manufacturing process that I want to clean up before I install the 2 halves. Quite a bit of flashing that wasn't removed from the manufacturing process. Kind of surprised, especially since some of these are surfaces where another piece is going to sit. Alright, with the flashing removed, you can go ahead and install the 2 halves together. And then we can install the 3 M3 by 12 millimeter screws in these 3 holes. I'm just starting the 3 screws, and then I'll go back and tighten, and then make sure that the top shaft rotation and idler gear is not binding up. And looks like everything is spinning nice and free. I mean, even though these 2 halves are together, I can see some light through the seam. Just this particular part just doesn't seem to fit very well together. Kind of surprised. All right, next we can move on to installing the differential using these pieces here. And in the initial setting, it's going to be 3 dots facing the bottom. So we're going to cut those off the sprue. And to kind of show you, this one has 1 dot, this one has 2, and the one I cut out has 3 dots. So let's use the hobby knife to trim off any excess that we don't want. So now that these are ready, what we can do is take the differential, and the way these are going to install is that the 3 dots are going to be facing downward. So we're going to install these on the bearings. All you got to do is push them on, and then make sure that the dots on both sides are going to be facing down. And the orientation for this is going to be the top shaft, and the screws on the differential are going to be facing the same way. Right? So that being said, the screws that hold the differential together and the top shaft are on the same side. And then we have 3 dots at the bottom here and 3 dots at the bottom there. And just spin everything, see how everything feels. Doesn't feel like there's any drag or anything like that. Actually, make sure that the pieces that hold the differential, the height adjustment pieces, aren't pushed too far in because they can rub the differential and cause it to kind of bind up. So once I move that out, it is moving nice and free. So next we can go ahead and install this piece. But before we do that, we're gonna add a little bit more graphite grease onto the differential gears. I'm just gonna put a line there, move it about 90 degrees, put another small line, move it 90 degrees, put another small line, and that should be more than enough. And then you can rotate it and make sure that there's enough grease on the gears. I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit more because not all the gears are. Just added a few more lines. And now I can tell that there's better coverage and all the teeth on the gears have grease and it's well lubricated. Everything moves nice and smooth. So we can go ahead and install this top cover. And the way this is going to install is these 4 holes are gonna install like so. There's only one way it goes on, but before you do that, I see some flashing that I want to clean up. Okay, so go ahead and install the top cover. You'll hear it snap. And we will use 2 M3 by 10 screws to install in these 2 holes, this one and this one. And I want to make sure that everything is moving nice and smooth and nothing's binding, and everything is. So we can move on to the next step. So now we're going to install the motor plate and the Spur Gear guard. So we have to take note of the orientation, that the Spur Gear guard goes on the opposite side of the countersunk holes. So make sure y'all can see that. These are countersunk holes here. On the back side it's flat. So this cover will go on the opposite side of the countersunk holes. And to install the cover, you have 2 M3 by 5 screws, and since it's going into metal, I'm going to add a small drop of blue Loctite. Wouldn't want this to back out. I just put a small drop of Loctite, and then I'm just going to kind of use the paper towel to kind of clean it off because I don't want too much on there. Just snug it up. It doesn't need to be too tight, and since you put Loctite on it, it shouldn't back out with any vibration. So now we can install the motor plate onto the transmission, and it's going to install like so. And you're going to use the 3 and 3x8mm screws to install it. And it looks like it's going to be the 2mm driver to install these. So I'm just going to get them all started first, and I'll go back and tighten it down. So now that's installed, we can put on, to make sure everything's still spinning freely. Now we can install the slipper clutch assembly. And make sure that your hands are nice and clean so you don't get any debris, dirt, or anything like that on the slipper pads. So first we're going to install this piece. Okay, so notice that this is oval and there's a slot in it, so we're gonna go ahead and install this facing like so. And it'll slide on pretty much all the way through, and the flat spots on the shaft, the top shaft, are going to go into that oval. All right, next is going to be one of the slipper pads. Then it's going to be the Spur Gear. And the Spur Gear has two sides. It has this side, which is going to be facing that particular pad, and it has this side where it's notched. So the notch portion is going to be facing outward. You just want to make sure that the slipper pad fits inside the groove on the Spur Gear on the back side. Now we can install another slipper pad. Then we're going to install the, looks like a friction disc of some sort. And the orientation of this is important. The flats will join up on the flats of the first piece we installed. So take note of that. So if you take a close look here, the flats on that disc I just installed lines up with the flat from the first piece. And these two metallic pieces are going to be pretty much flush. So next we can install the last slipper pad. And then finally we can install this last piece. And note the orientation of the oval slot that's in there. It's going to install onto the flats on the top shaft. So take note of that. There we go. Next, we can install the spring, the washer. It has a smaller section. You can kind of see there. That smaller diameter is going to go towards the spring, and it holds the spring kind of centered in. And then lastly, we can install the nut. And the initial adjustment for the slipper clutch is to have the nut flush with the end of the top shaft. It's a 7mm. And there we go, that's flush. And after you install that nut, make sure everything is spinning nice and free, which it is. It feels nice and smooth. So that completes step 2 or bag 2 of the build. Please comment down below if you have any tips or tricks, or if you had any issues with this. You know, I didn't have any issues putting it together, but I do notice that, you know, there's a big gap here. There's a gap around this area. I'm sure once I install the screws, that'll kind of help. There's, you know, a pretty big gap here as well. Once, you know, install the screws for the shock tower, that probably would help too, but just kind of surprised at the quality of the plastic isn't as nice as some of the other builds I've done, and just like the fit isn't quite there, but everything does move nice and free, so pretty excited about that. But if you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. I'd love to hear about your comments if you had any problems with this build, or if you have any tips for any other person who might be doing this build, or even for me, that might be helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one where I move on to step 3. Thanks.